Welcome. My name is Becca Reynolds, and I am part of the programming team at the Deschutes Public Library. This month of January, our theme is stories. So we are bringing people in to tell all kinds of stories. And today, Laurie Danzuka will be joining us to share a story. So to introduce our speaker, Laurie has been an education advocate for preschool to post-secondary education for the past 20 plus years. She grew up, went to school, raised her family, and presently lives on the Warm Springs Indian Reservation. She believes there can be a balance in tribal education and public education rather than choosing one over the other. Laurie is sharing her story through life experiences and from her personal lens and perspective. She shares to create understanding and to address common misconceptions. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off my camera. And Laurie, thank you.
Thank you for having me. Really happy to be here this morning. Nikmatski Winishash Timathla Kushyaptitamki Laurie Danzuka. I greeted you in my native language, which is Itishkian or Warm Springs. I'm a member of the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, and I just greeted you, let you know what my Indian name is. And then my English name is Laurie Danzuka. And as Becca stated, I have lived and raised my family here on the reservation. And through the work, I have looked to try to let people know more about the reservation and kind of the educational challenges that children, Native students face. But through that, my background, I am 8 of 9 children. I grew up on a ranch here on the reservation, so a lot of my background and experience. My mother and my father both attended boarding school, and the direct impact that had on me was when they returned from boarding school, they didn't want any of their children to go through what they had gone through. So they didn't want us to learn our native language. That is part of my personal background, but I also have joined a lot of different tribal educational organizations. I started out at Head Start, so my heart has really been at preschool because I really feel it's important for parents to have their voice once they get out of preschool and then transition into a public education system. So that's really been my advocacy across the board, is making sure parents are able to be a part of their child's formal education because they are their first and most important teacher at home. And then I have raised 4 kids, 2 are adults, and I have a teenager, and I have a little grandson who is in the 3rd grade. And I have been able to be a strong advocate and voice for them. And how we do that and how I do that for them is to make sure they have the ability to have access to their cultural. So I advocate for cultural preservation, language revitalization. Personally, like I stated before, my mom and my grandma were both what we call traditional food gatherers. What we follow here in our lifeways is we don't follow the calendar year, we follow the life cycle of our what we call our first foods. So I inherited that role. It was handed down to me from my mother, and that is what I consider my first and most important role, because since we follow the life cycle and the food cycle, our calendar really depends on that. So when they're ready, that's our call and our duty to go do that. And that's lifeways that we have always followed. We have been doing that for since time immemorial. Our tribal people have done that and continue to do that. The way that looked changed through the last couple of years through the pandemic, but it didn't stop. And to me, those cultural lifeways of what has sustained us as a people and what allow us that traditional education and how we view life, plant life, four-legged life, human life, and how we're all connected. And overarching all of that is water and the life that water gives. Because if we didn't have water, none of the other parts would exist in that. So I am really excited to be doing this work. I've been in my present position, which is my official title is a Native American Success Coordinator. But what I do is through the region, throughout the region, I have been sharing tribal history, shared history, and the importance that has on education. And to me, it's happening at a really good time when people have shown interest. And we've concentrated on the central region because the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs is neighbors to Bend, Redmond, Sisters, Prineville. Those are Lapine. So we want to make sure, I want to make sure through my work and my supervisor is allowing us to create a space. So I like to share this at every one of my presentations is the space that we're in today. I want that to be considered a safe space to ask the questions you didn't know who to ask, or you didn't know how to ask, or you didn't know if it was appropriate to ask. Because a lot of time, we don't know what we don't know. So I want to make sure that this space is one where we're all at different spaces in our learning. We're all at a different part of the process. And I myself am just one tribal member who's speaking about my story and my experience and where I have come from. So it certainly can't be considered representative of the whole, especially there's 9 tribes in Oregon, but there's also 574 recognized tribes throughout the United States. So I like to make that little disclaimer, but I also want people to know that it's a good time to be learning. It's a good time to be open to learning to create understanding. So I have an official presentation to share, and I will start sharing my screen. So I tend to talk a lot through my presentation. It is quite lengthy, but I've given this presentation so many times that I really hit on a lot of things. So since I got a lot of those first ones out of the way, I'm going to start here. One of the first things I get asked a lot about is folks ask what they should call people, and language is important. Language matters. When you're asking a Native person what they prefer to be called, you're acknowledging their sovereignty and their self-identity, how they identify themselves. So there are several different things here. one of the most widely known ones is American Indian Alaska Native, and that has been used throughout the years, and it's still used today, mainly because the state of Oregon funding streams have used this terminology, so it continues to be used. There's Native American, bands, pueblos, communities, villages, indigenous. In Canada, it's First Nations, Métis, or Inuk. But what I like to share with people is you really need to just ask, what do you prefer? I'm from the Warm Springs Nation. I'm a member of the Warm Springs tribe. I am Warm Springs, Wasco, and Paiute. So it's really up to you. And it depends on who you ask. You might get a different answer from each one. So don't expect. For example, I've talking to some elders here in the tribe, and like, what do you prefer to be called? And they're just like, I'm an Indian. You can call me an Indian. So it just really depends. So that I just tell people you just need to ask. So next, I want to go into some historical context. I hit on this a little bit, time immemorial, and what basically what that means is before people started keeping track of time, native populations have been here. And a term that we use a lot across Turtle Island or Indian country, which is essentially North America, the indigenous populations of North America. In our region, which is now known as Oregon, there were over 30 distinct languages. And there is proof that we have inhabited these areas. There was a prehistoric man found on the Columbia River who was dubbed Kennewick Man. And under the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act of 1990, the Umatilla tribe sought jurisdiction over the remains, but the U.S. had decided there was no genetic link, the Supreme Court. But in 2015, further DNA findings confirmed that the ancient one was Native American, and he was returned to tribes in 2017. So I just like to give a little background on what it is specific to Oregon, and the things that were found, that historically were found and historically documented in the state of Oregon. So there has been a lot of question around whether we were here or we were relocated here. There's a lot of different stuff. And since there isn't really anything particular, when I was in high school, the representation in my history books was of Plains Indians, to North Dakota, South Dakota, and those areas who are hunting buffalo. That our tribe is, that's not our cultural practices. So that's why it's really important for me through my work to let people know what is specific to our tribe and kind of what our cultural practices are. And we'll get to that in the presentation. One of the things I wanted to highlight on this screen is really when the 1792 expedition, Captain Gray gave claim to Oregon, because at that time, the way the military operated was as long as they set sight on it, they could claim it as part of the territory. So that is how that happened, and that's how they stuck claim to the Oregon territory. And the Lewis and Clark expedition was part of the whole manifest destiny, the belief that the U.S. was justified to occupy and rule all land from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And their right to do that was perceived as more rights than the original inhabitants of the land. So that's why a lot of natives were just relocated or and I know a lot of people might have heard of the Trail of Tears, the Cherokee Trail of Tears. But as you can see from the map, there have been several tribes impacted by relocation to what they deemed Indian Territory, which is present day Oklahoma. So there's a lot of different northern tribes and southern tribes that were a part of a lot of different Indian removal. They were basically given 5 years to relocate. If they didn't relocate within that 5 years, then they were forcefully relocated. I just wanted to make a note of the Seminole tribe from Florida was relocated, and all the different areas you can see on here. So if they didn't relocate, now today they have the Seminole tribe of Florida and the Seminole tribe of Oklahoma. Because some of them stayed behind, they didn't want to leave their homeland, so they hid. And then they eventually reassimilated back into society until they, the military was no longer forcing people to move. And then also there was a Supreme Court decision made. Like I said, the discovery rights were deemed more outweighed what they called wanderers. And then they had the Indian Removal Act in 1830. President Jackson ordered the military to displace 60,000 Native Americans between 1830 and 1850. And then 1836 encroachment. This is specific to Oregon. 70% of the Calapooians, which is the present day Willamette Valley area, were wiped out from disease. And I really like to present this number during the time period after European contact. 9 out of 10 Native Americans died. So 55 million people perished because of violence and disease like smallpox, measles, and influenza. So all the things that were brought over that they were never, they didn't have the immune system to fight off those diseases. So unfortunately, a lot of the natives were also wiped out from that. And then this map is just in 1850, the remove you can see as the settlement goes from the East Coast, east to west. So 1850 was the lands in the red, and then 1865, then 1880, and then 1990. So I like to use this visual just to kind of show you how that from landing and accessing and moving, settlers wanting to get their own land and homestead and that sort of thing. I talked to this a little bit on residential school impact. I really like to go to, there were 408 boarding schools in 37 states from 1819 to 1969. The main reason for this was what they deemed cultural assimilation. Colonel Richard Pratt had a quote, kill the Indian, save the man. So in essence, his goal was if we could teach them how to not be Indian, then we could civilize them, because the nomadic way of life was seen as uncivilized, because like I had stated earlier on, natives follow the food cycle. So wherever the food is where we travel. Throughout Oregon, from here, from my tribe, it'd be Columbia River, Inchiwana, the big river for salmon, and then down towards Umatilla, John Day. We have some roots that we gather down south through Bend, roots that we gather coming back up through Redmond, Metolius, Metulayish is where we fished, hunted, gathered back through Mount Hood, huckleberries, choke cherries, Brighton Bush, choke cherries, and then on Willamette Falls for lamprey or eel. So that is basically where we had traveled to continue to gather. So when they started these residential schools, they would send them away to schools to essentially teach them civilized manners. And then one of the bigger, more well-known schools, one of the boarding schools was the Carlisle Indian School. And this slide portrays one of the students, Tom, who was of Navajo descent, Dene, in the first picture, or the picture on the left is when he came to the school in 1882. And then the right picture is from 1885. And what the meaning for this was so that the people who ran the school would be able to advocate to get funding to continue running their school. So it was seen as a success story. See on the left, were in his uncivilized and savage ways, and the right is see he's civilized and he's become a productive citizen. So they would use these in order to get funding, because as in education, as we all know, not everything gets funded at the level it needs to be funded. Through the process of forced assimilation, a lot of things that happened where they were forced to cut their hair, forced to turn over their traditional clothing, and taking from their families. The reasoning behind it was, if you take them from their families, then they won't continue to practice those ways. So we have to put them in an environment where they're away from their family. And through that process, they also separated brothers and sisters. So brothers and sisters, if they weren't together, they were less likely to want to run away, or they were less likely to try to fight back. So and then if they did practice these things, or they did speak their language, or they did practice cultural ways of prayer or dance, they were punished as a part of that. Various means of punishment. And most of these boarding schools were housed in old military, so they had detention facilities in them, so they were able to punish them. So, and then what also happened was they took all these tribal children from all these different areas of what is now present day United States. They put them all together in another place. So they all speak different languages. They all have different cultural backgrounds. So they're further isolation for them. But it also led to spread of disease that way, because they were bringing a bunch of people together from different parts of the world, different areas, or different types of contact. So it also caused a lot of disease. So a lot of children, unfortunately, died when they were at residential school. And you may have heard of some of that today, as the Department of Interior has put together a report on boarding schools and the impacts, and how there have been burial sites found at some of these schools now, and there's a struggle between Native nations. Every tribal nation is different. So some tribes are asking for the remains to be returned, and some are asking to let them rest where they are, not to disturb them further. But that report has been out for a couple of years now. And the main goal and reasoning behind that is, and again, to create understanding and kind of shed light on what really happened, because the history hasn't, been made public for most. Question I get asked a lot of times in our district, there's probably about 34-35% Native American population, and the girls and the boys all wear their hair long. And this comes out of kind of honoring, we honor those who couldn't wear their hair long, and then we speak our language for those who weren't allowed to, and practice our dances and social for those who were punished for doing it. So it's all for, on the Native side, it's kind of that reconciliation of, yeah, they weren't allowed to do that, but now we have to honor them for surviving, and to making sure we can still continue those practices today. And then a lot of what Native belief is, we believe that if we take care of the land will take care of you. And this falls back again to our first foods that are natural and wild, that we have hunted and gathered since time immemorial. But these were looked on as, again, not civilized. So they wanted to convert them to one spot and turn them into farmers. And our first foods, I didn't list it on here, but first foods from my tribe are salmon, deer meat, elk meat, four-leggeds, and then our roots, kechi, bitterroot, buksh, which is like a kind of like a potato, sawit, which is a sweet carrot. It tastes like a carrot. And then we have our berries, our huckleberries, and our chokecherries. And a lot of different tribal nations have some sort of creation story. So our creation story revolves around our first foods. So a long time ago, creator set out to, he brought plant life, and then he allowed plant life to take hold and grow and thrive. And then he, creator, added the four-leggeds, the animals. So all the different animals came down and they interacted, and they were successful in how, where they lived, how they acclimated, that sort of thing. And then lastly, creator brought down human to Earth, to inhabit Earth. And the humans struggled. They didn't know what plants were good for them. They didn't know how to build shelter. They didn't know how to make clothing. So in the winter they were cold. In the summer they were hot. So a lot of them were struggling and suffering. So Creator came down, met with the four-leggeds, and he said, I want you all to help out the humans. They're struggling over here. So we need to help them figure out what foods are going to help them and sustain them over time. So salmon was the first one to raise his hand. And then the four-leggeds continued, and salmon was like, I'll give my whole body to help the humans um, to thrive and sustain their life here on Earth. And then it went down the line. The other four-leggeds put their hands up. Um, so they gave their whole animal to help and protect. So natives still to this day are really mindful of using the whole animal uh, for um, for food, for meat, the hides for clothing, the hides of the smaller four-leggeds for decoration and symbol. And I apologize if I was doing this in person, I would have had my presentation with all this stuff laid out so people could actually see it. But so you always make sure you're honoring the animal who gave his life to sustain and help and feed you. So that's a big part of the culture. Um, but Salmon had grown very boastful. And he said, I have my place at the head of the table because I was the first one to stand up. And he said that his children were the most important children, so they needed to be treated the best. And he was really not very nice to all the other animals. So the animals called upon Creator and asked Creator to come down and help them. Can you come down and help us with Salmon? Because we feel like we're all really important too, and we shouldn't be, we shouldn't have to put Salmon up high because Salmon thinks Salmon should be placed up high. So Creator came down and had a conversation with Salmon and said, we're really grateful that you stepped up and volunteered to sacrifice yourself to help the humans as a part of, their foods and to help them prosper here. But it is not a good way to be boastful and talk about how you are the most important. And Salmon responded with, but I am the most important. My kids are the most important, and they should be viewed in that way because I stepped up, and that's how, you know. So Creator said, okay, Salmon, if that's how you feel about it, from this day forward, uh, you will have lots and lots of children, but you will never get to see them grow up. So as a part of our creation story, we want to make sure that all of our foods are, although they're placed in that manner, they're all equally important in our survival and our ability to sustain our life. So we have to honor all of the animals that sustain us and those fish foods throughout the year. So we have feasts to do that. We have what's called a Latit feast, which is the first food of the year, and it's a wild celery. So when that comes up, there's still snow on the ground. And then we have a feast to honor that. And that signals salmon coming home. So then the salmon come back up and lay their eggs. And then the new life cycle begins for salmon. Then we have a salmon feast, which is April usually. And then we have March, April. And we honor our roots. Our roots come up and we have a root feast to honor those. And then later in July or August, we have a huckleberry feast to honor our huckleberry feast. And so those continue this life cycle that we practice year after year. And that's our calendar. We don't follow a normal calendar. So when the salmon are calling, we go to harvest. When the eel are calling, we go to harvest. When the roots are ready, we go and harvest. So they're when I'm talking about how that calendar doesn't always coincide with the education calendar, we have a lot of students that are missing because, like I said, in my opinion, that's my most important role. So when I'm called to do that duty and feed the rest of the membership, that's what comes first. So through those feasts, we honor the foods, we honor Creator, and we obviously honor life, because without life, none of these would be possible. And then once we do that as a community, as a tribal nation, as a whole, then everybody in the tribe can go out and gather for themselves. So we want to make sure we're honoring all those foods through that process. And every tribe has some kind of different creation story of how they came out to be. That just is one small story from my tribal nation, which really funny. I'll share another story on that. I was doing a presentation to a first grade class, and at the end of the story, I let her know, creators, said, Salmon, you're not going to be able to see your children grow up. One of the kids was devastated. She's like, what? Oh no, that can't be. And I try to remind her, we all go back, we follow that life cycle, we all sustain. As natives too, we also believe in that next life. So we're not cremated, so we can move on to the next. So, and we don't know what we may come back as, so we have to honor all the plant life and all the really good life. So. I'm gonna skip through some of this. I do like to highlight this historical figures that you might have heard of. Chief Sitting Bull is Tatanka Yatanka from the Teton Sioux, Crazy Horse from the Oglala Sioux. Chief Joseph was from the Nez Perce tribe. And then Geronimo was Chiricahua Apache. So I like to call these for the last holdout. So as I said, a lot of the disagreement between settlers and colonization was because the natives were nomadic and they were moving to hunt, moving to fish, moving to gather their foods. So they weren't staying in one place. And in order for people to come in and settle and get tracts of land, they wanted them to settle down and be in one place. And these four gentlemen tried to do that. Sitting Bull actually, they didn't want to give up that right to hunt and fish. They didn't want to give up the right to be able to take care of their family in the manner that they had already taken care of. So in the end, Chief Sitting Bull and Chief Joseph and Crazy Horse were supposed to escape to Canada to escape persecution. Chief Sitting Bull made it, but he was so lonely for his family and his home that he eventually did come back, and then he did end up getting killed on his reservation for what was called treason at the time. Chief Joseph tried to escape, but he was unwilling to leave his family and his tribal people behind. So he eventually got caught before he reached Canada. And at that time, he had surrendered and ended up settling on the reservation. Crazy Horse, we're not really sure. There's not really any verification on photos of him. He was that elusive. So not really sure what happened to him, but it was determined that he was probably just still trying to escape and not have to settle down. But he eventually did get killed in some sort of conflict. Geronimo was captured as part of his surrender. All he asked was that he not be sent to prison. He said he would stay on his reservation with his family. And that was all he had asked for. He said he would stop fighting and stay on the reservation as long as he could be with his family. That was not honored. They sent him away to prison where he eventually ended up dying away from his family. As a part of boarding school, we have what now to this day is what we call the National Day of Remembrance. Sorry, I apologize. September 30th is a day to honor the victims and survivors of Indian boarding schools and recognize the ongoing trauma resulting from that federal Indian policy. So a lot of that distrust and a lot of that forced assimilation created a gap within Native communities, tribal nations, where families were separated. And so when they came home from residential schools, they still weren't able to function as parents because they weren't raised by their parents. They were raised in a boarding school. So this is to continue to address that. It's a way of supporting them, and how you do that is wear orange in support of that day. So there's a movement across the Indian country, or which is all of North America, all the tribal nations in Canada and the United States, where we wear orange in support of that day. And it's really just to make sure we don't forget the sacrifices that were made to help us get to where we are now. And it's really a push in public schools for cultural preservation and language revitalization, and the importance of how knowing your tribal language relates to your cultural education. We have here on the reservation what we call cottonums or longhouses, which is, I guess, equivalent to what a church is. So we also have all the other churches as well, Baptist, Christian, Catholic. We have those on the reservation as well. But it's people's personal preference on where they want to go. But it's still, we want to be able to recognize what families have gone through and endured, and recognize that and honor that, and make sure we never forget, what they had gone through, and make sure that never happens again in public education. I get asked this a lot, and I want to hit on this before we get to questions. Is there are still boarding schools that exist today. The one here in Oregon is the Chemawa Boarding School, which is by Salem. It is not run in the way it was back then. The board of directors consisted of members from all the 9 tribes of Oregon, and it is still run as a school, a residential school, where families choose if their children want to go there or not. And the reason they might want to choose to go there is because they can offer different cultural clubs, cultural activities, incorporation of language into the school more than they would be able to in a public education system. So they're not run in the same way as they were before. And there's another Sherman Indian High School in California, and then there's Anadarko, which is in Oklahoma. And those are also run by the tribal nations in that area. And they're really run in a manner to be able to focus their education more on tribal cultural language importance, and is not sure, Becca, is my time up for presenting?
No, we have about 15 minutes. If anybody has any questions to ask, we have a Q&A box that you can drop those questions into.
Okay.
So if you have a question for Laurie, you can either drop it in the chat box or in the Q&A box. Either one we will be able to see. Looks like we have one. How much of a role, excuse me, how much of a role does hunting and fishing play in your day-to-day lives?
So we are we still practice all those ways. We have on the women's side, and this is only, I want to be clear, women's is gathering of the roots and the berries, and the traditional harvesting of meat and fish is traditionally done by the men. And the only reason we have that distinction is because women are the givers of life in the traditional side of it. But outside of traditional hunting and gathering, all families, including women, participate in that. So we have goals that are fishing. We fish at our different sites along the Columbia River, Deschutes River, and the tributaries in there, and also Shears Falls. So those are all directed by what we call Indian Fishing Commission, and they oversee how much fish we can take, when we can take those fish. And we still consider first foods as the healthiest foods for us, because once we started having processed foods in our diets, that's when a lot of heart disease, cancer, all those things come into mix. So we really rely on our first foods to be as part of our healing process, and that's a day-to-day thing for us. We can't hunt all the time on the reservation, but we do have what we call ways to access meat through our tribal organization, and that's run by our branch of natural resources.
Another question here. In your view, what are the most important things that educators can do to honor tribal histories in schools today?
What I say is actually having the curriculum is not out yet, but the curriculum is almost at the point where it can be used in schools. And that's really the first way to do that. But there's also, you can do some homework. You can be an ally, have Native authors, use Native authors' work. We have books written about the Columbia River and the Columbia Plateau tribes that are in existence that can be used as reference. I have a list of references that I would be glad to share. And also this presentation, I would be glad to, I obviously can share that as well, that have already been vetted through the National Indian Education Association. So you're not, I make sure and tell educators, don't Google it and use what's off of Google. Use a vetted source, and I already have those sources available, and I'd be glad to share those with Becca, and she can share with the group.
Yeah, certainly. I'm happy to pass along that information. Another question here. Did your parents remember their native language after the boarding school? Were they able to teach you?
My mother only spoke to my grandma. When she came home from boarding school, she sat down with us and said, I don't want you to go through what I had to go through. I want you to learn how to live in that world. And I don't want you to learn your language. So she did not teach me my language. Excuse me, it was not allowed in schools at the time. We've slowly brought it back. She spoke fluently. She spoke at ceremonies, she spoke at other things, but she didn't want us to learn. That was one of the, like I said, a direct impact on us. My father spoke it as well. He was Wasco. So the tribes have 3 different languages: Warm Springs, Wasco, and Paiute. So Ichishkian, Kichton, Numu. So we currently only have 11 fluent speakers left for Ichishkian, which is a language I'm learning. So I know bits and pieces, I know colors, I know animals, and I incorporate that, in my teachings with my own children. But as I said, I'm learning too. So thank you for that question.
We have one more here. Is it okay to offer Western kind of training? For example, Western bodywork training based on touch to Native Americans, Or do Native Americans feel their traditional Native way of healing is enough, and offering a Western way does not respect the richness of what is Native teachings and traditions to achieve health and well-being?
I'd say it's a little bit of both. Um, I have I have family members who won't go anywhere near Western medicine. They only use traditional. But I also have folks who have learned to take bits and pieces of what works for them and what doesn't work for them. But we have a lot of practices there on the tribal side that people consider healing ways. We have foods that are for healing for certain things, headache, stomach ache, that sort of thing that are used. So I wouldn't say it's a bad thing to offer it. I think there are different things that work for different people. Everybody has a different kind of makeup in their body. And I personally, the ones I say no to for help for me is really any kind of pain medicine. I really try to find alternative ways of healing and more natural ways of healing to manage pain, just because of the opioid crisis and the things that are that still are negatively impacting the Native population. So we're always looking for alternative ways around that. That's me personally. So
And one more question here we have two more actually. The first one is the language being taught today?
yes, there are three different languages that are being taught. We have a Warm Springs K-8 Academy here on the reservation. We have three separate classrooms, and they teach K-8, so kindergarten through eighth grade. Actually, our first kind of cohort, we started out at kindergarten, then added in first and added in second as we went through. The K-8 is now in its ninth year. So our class of language learners has now moved into the high school. So now we are offering Ichishkin and Kitch at our high school as well. So we're K-12 in those two languages, and we're still working to incorporate the last one. And then we also have what we have a language bowl, and that's really a way for our students to form teams. It's a competition, but it's also a way for them to show off where they're at in their learning and their continued learning process. So I think we've done a really good job of bringing it back and bringing it back into our schools. And our principal has been really good about it, because he said schools is what took it away. So schools is what should help them revitalize it.
Um, if we want to offer or share something to Native American folks, who do we reach out to? How do we make contact?
For most tribal nations, they have a public relations person that they can reach out to, or they have an education director that they can reach out to. If it's specific to educators and education, so, through that, I'd say the director of education for tribal nations, and every single tribe in Oregon has one of those, and I believe they're listed on the ODE website. And then if it's just for tribes, information to go to the tribe or get to know more about the tribe, every tribe has a public relations person on staff that is a direct contact for any kind of information sharing like that.
And you answered the first part of this question about whether how the schools are teaching Native languages, but the second part of this question, does the schools in Warm Spring currently teach Native traditional ways of living?
Yes, we do. That has proved to be a little bit more difficult, because what we've tried to do is get guest speakers to come in. Um, Part of my role through the ESD is obviously to do that, and we have done what we call cultural enrichment. So we come in during music time or PE time, or we do a specific classroom, or we can do an assembly. It just depends on what the school wants. So we come in and do, I call it cultural enrichment. So it's drumming and singing and dancing, kind of really depending on the grade level of how deep we get into that. So I have different presentations for K-5, middle school, and then high school. So it really depends. So we do a lot of more through high school. It's a lot more geared towards treaty, ceded lands, more of that civic rights piece of it. But K-5, it's really about here's some colors, names of animals, and then drumming. Because we do have in our school specific, we do the making of what we call a hand drum. I should have brought it in here. It's in my room. But we have making of a hand drum. So they're still able to get that hands-on knowledge and creation. So we also think if we have something that they've made themselves, they're more likely to take care of it and honor it better. And we're really working on that so they can. We lost a lot of that cultural learning because in my space, when I'm out gathering foods, it's everybody, it's a group of us, 25 to 30 of us. And when I was growing up, everybody was teaching me. So it's really a community learning, and we've really kind of lost a lot of that, and we're really trying to bring that back. Great question.
All right. One final question asking about non-natives coming to the Warm Springs Reservation. The term powwow is used, so maybe you can even talk about that term.
Yeah. So what I like to say is celebrations. So we have a variety of different celebrations here on the reservations. They're all open to the public. Even our feasts are open to the public as well. We invite a lot of different people to come in and witness and be a part of that. Sometimes it can be hard to understand, so it's easier if you have kind of a connection already. And the term powwow is really just social dancing. And I equate it to ceremony versus celebration. So there's some things that are ceremony and some things that are celebration. And powwow is really a celebration. It's different tribal folks coming together from different parts of the world, coming together, singing and dancing and coming together in a good way to heal and support each other. It's more of a community gathering. We do have a powwow coming up in February. I believe it's 9th, 10th, and 11th. It's here in Warm Springs, which is open to the public. Last year, I think we got our highest number of non-natives who came and attended that. So I'm really happy to see more people wanting to. I always tell people you learn more about folks in their environment where they feel comfortable, and they're more than happy to share, and we always welcome people in, and it's not looked on as trying to come to something and be something you're not. It's viewed as you're our guest, and we want you to come celebrate with us.
Thank you, Laurie, and we look forward to your future presentations.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.